A quick like and subscribe really helps our channel grow and allows us to bring you even more amazing content. Thank you for your support.
I was never the type to believe in urban legends or ghost stories, but when my sister vanished from a place that officially doesn't exist, I had to reconsider everything. It started on a late August afternoon when Anna decided to take a weekend trip into the mountains, claiming she found this quaint little town called Eldridge Falls that wasn't far off her hiking trail. She was always searching for secluded spots to uncover and photograph, a passion that doubled as an escape from the daily grind of the city. A week passed without any word from her, which wasn't overly concerning until her calls went straight to voicemail. Her texts received no acknowledgement. I drove through the drizzly afternoon towards the GPS coordinates she had last shared, past rusted signposts and withered trees, feeling the uncanny sensation of the world falling away behind me. As the pavement disappeared into gravel, my skepticism mingled with an uneasy realization. I was entering a place unnamed on my maps, its existence whispered in hushed tones by locals who spoke of shadowy occurrences and inexplicable disappearances. The town materialized around a bend, like a page turned too quickly in a forgotten book. Its narrow streets were eerily deserted, the paint flaking off the quaint Victorian-style homes lining them. The air felt stagnant, time suspended in this pocket of forgotten America. Despite the setting sun, a disconcerting lack of sound surrounded me, no crickets, no birds, just oppressive silence. I found the inn Anna had mentioned booking, a rundown relic that seemed abandoned, its sign faintly swinging in foreboding creaks. An old woman behind a dusty front desk eyed me with what seemed like ill-concealed disdain, or perhaps pity. Her deep-set eyes were murky, pools of forgotten memories. When I mentioned my sister, she seemed to shudder slightly, muttering something about people who venture too far. She handed over a key absent-mindedly, as if her mind had wandered to darker realms. My room was something pulled from an old black-and-white photograph, a claustrophobic space draped in shadows tinged with sepia. The first night was unsettling, dreams of Anna whispering warnings blurred with visions of shadowy figures moving just beyond the periphery of my consciousness. I woke in a cold sweat, feeling as if I were being observed. Determined to find any trace of her, I spent the daylight hours exploring the town. Eldridge Falls seemed caught in a time just out of reach from progress, a place where every door seemed firmly shut, every window an opaque eye hiding unknown truths. Asking about Anna only drew blank stares or nervous flutterings. It was clear they knew something, but an undercurrent of fear held them silent. My nights were restless, the dreams becoming more vivid, more oppressive, as if the town, or something within it, was trying to tell me something it couldn't say when awake. On the fourth day, I stumbled onto a path leading out of town, partly hidden by overgrown weeds and a decaying wooden marker with no discernible script. I followed it against the intuitive urge to turn back, my resolve steeled by memories of Anna's laughter. The path wound into a dense forest, draped in mystic fog, the sunlight filtering through in dull whispers. Each step echoed, each rustle set my heart pounding. Then, I found the remnants of a cable car station, cables trailing ominously into the clouds above, and a ledger inside, the last entry in a neat hand, and his unmistakable scrawl, scrawled across the page, "Met some people." Exploring further. Eldridge Falls hides secrets. The next few hours were a blur of frantic investigation. The townsfolk grew more reticent, their eyes pleading for me to stop. When I visited the local library, an echoing chamber of dust and forgotten lore, the librarian, a gnarled man with eyes that danced like fireflies, whispered frenetically about the history of Eldridge Falls, a settlement erased from official records following a tragic mining incident decades earlier. He hinted at something more sinister than bureaucratic negligence, something ancient, a binding fate inked in blood, he called it. My determination gave way to despair drenched in urgency, but the librarian pressed a fragile envelope into my hand, mumbling about truths no one wanted to see. Inside was a photograph, the grainy depiction of revelers in a bygone festival, Anna's face unmistakably surrounded by unfamiliar figures whose eyes seemed to see beyond the image. I returned to the inn stunned, my skin crawling with the cold breath of the unseen world pressing in closer. That night, my dreams turned violent, as if something wanted out, thrashing within the confines of my mind. When dawn broke, I made my decision, to leave, to bring back help if necessary, but my resolve wavered as a new weight pressed upon me. Anna, whose laughter now echoed mockingly through the stillness, faded into it. But I couldn't just leave without knowing. On my final exploration, I stumbled upon an entrance to what seemed like an underground complex, eerily beckoning and foreboding. An insistent yet inaudible call. Some may say curiosity is dangerous, but perhaps it was kinship that drove me to descend into the darkness, into the belly of Eldridge Falls that morning. As I trudged deeper, Electrical cables intertwined with gnarled roots in an unsettling dance beneath the earth, weaving a tapestry of forgotten secrets. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of damp history. The corridor turned and twisted, shadows deepening until the silence broke, not with Anna's voice, but a cacophony of anguished whispers and metallic groans, the voices of past souls tethered to this place beyond time. In the dim light of my phone, I glimpsed her. Anna stood, facing away, her form faint around the edges as if phasing between worlds. Tentatively, yet desperately, I reached out, but her image flickered like a dying bulb, a tender agony in her gaze, the knowledge of a sister forever out of reach yet forever entwined with this place. My heart broke in that eternal instant when everything shattered into tumultuous dark. I awoke at the edge of town as if cast out, the sun bearing down with harsh clarity that crushed any lingering dreamscape. Behind me, the town lay untouched by the passing hours, still holding secrets more profound than the gnarled histories I'd uncovered. They were anecdotal displays, leaving Eldridge Falls unmarked, a place that didn't exist yet persistently lingered in the shadow realm of memory. I never found Anna's physical presence again, but her soft gaze haunted the edges of my perception, in every shadow cast and every whisper caught on the wind. Her disappearance was outshone by the more pressing reality, that I survived the place, marked by truths untold, deeper than any plausible fiction. I understood now, some absences permeate existence more intensely than presence. I left Eldridge Falls behind, but it never truly let go of me. My sister was gone, lost in a town that doesn't exist, yet never completely erased from reality. Alright, brace yourselves because what I'm about to confess might send a chill down your spine, especially if you've ever indulged in fast food chicken nuggets. Let me take you back a few years to when I worked the late-night shift at our local fast food joint. I wasn't just another teenager killing time and hunting for booze money, I had a purpose. I did something that most of you might consider a blessing, perhaps even a hit of pure luck, a gift from the nugget gods. But behind those cheeky extra McNuggets, there was something darker. It started innocently. I was a bored high schooler, feeling invisible under those greasy fluorescent lights, just another pawn in the grind of minimum wage. I started adding an extra McNugget to random orders because, hell, why not? It wasn't coming out of my check, and the delight it brought to unsuspecting customers was a drug in itself. But what began as petty rebellion morphed into something I never anticipated. One particularly slow night, close to the graveyard shift, I noticed a pattern: strangers who came in looking normal, like weary travelers, ordinary parents with screaming kids, or that loner teen with hooded eyes. Once they got those extraordinary meals, they'd return, not always the next night or the next week, but eventually, with a glow in their eyes that I recognized. We exchanged wordless smiles, a silent understanding, as if they knew that someone had handpicked them, made their lives incrementally, digestively happier. With time, these customers became familiar, their lives somehow intertwined with mine. What I didn't realize was that they weren't just coming back for the tantalizing chance of an extra nugget, they returned because they were becoming addicted to something far darker than fast food. Beneath the surface, those McNuggets carried a shadowy secret I was oblivious to. Our food shipment had changed suppliers without warning, and nothing was quite as it seemed. Not until one night, when a shadow cloaked the counter, a face so unsettlingly familiar it made my stomach curl. He leaned in, reeking of something sour and mossy, like forgotten graves. Without saying much, except for a casual "Hey kid, nice night for extras, huh?" I realized he saw through the gimmick, straight to the darkness nesting beneath fryers and sizzling grease traps. His eyes were like shards of coal, almost void of life, yet pulsating with something sinister. The grin he shot me felt omnipotent, as if crowning him the ringmaster of my puppet show. For weeks after that encounter, my nights warped into something not of time but of tension. Customers continued to come, but I noticed how they appeared different, not just happy, but eerily euphoric, their faces flushed yet skin taut over bones, eyes bulging like they've gazed into the abyss and returned with a taste that can never be satisfied without my intervention. Their increased frequency and fervor began to terrify me. They came during odd hours, restlessly peering through glass panes long after closing. One by one, they dripped in, some begging, some threatening, until it was clear that the extra McNugget trick had hooked them. However, it was the aftermath that sparked my dread. A string of reports on the news about missing persons overlapped disturbingly with my list of frequenters. The most unsettling part? Each report mentioned an unnatural obsession with fast food chicken nuggets just before their disappearance. Eventually, those reports dwindled, leaving a dark void in public discourse, and I could almost hear that sinister melody playing somewhere in the shadows, a hymn only I seemed to tune into. It was as if my little act of unauthorized generosity had connected these souls to me, and something far beyond me. I tried quitting multiple times, but the hold it had on me, and them, was inexplicable. Like a web, sticky and resilient, every other job attempt collapsed the moment a person walked in holding a crumpled nugget box, eyes locked onto mine like they'd wandered through galaxies just to find the creator of their boundless longing. Sometimes I'd wake at night drenched in sweat, a ghostly whisper haunting my dreams, "Fetus." I'd see flashes of all those faces, including the ones that stopped returning, like flickering shades in a nightmare carnival, forever hungry, forever searching. As time and courage betrayed me, stacking the odds against breaking free, I became aware that the greasy little packets weighed more than just processed chicken. They bore cravings, desires, and stories of lives slipping away. The last shift I worked, that strange man returned, strikingly unchanged as if time bypassed him. He leaned across the counter, those eyes promising a twilight of peace, or the complete absence thereof. "You were chosen," he murmured, "to feed souls beyond your world." Then he slid a nugget towards me, a maddening echo of those I'd once given out like candies. Only now, the gesture felt final, a haunting cape swirled around my fading sanity. That encounter sealed it for me. I've stayed on the move since, working nights at random gas stations, diners, anywhere those familiar faces can't find me. But even there, the allure trails like an insidious shadow. No matter how far I run, echoes of crackling fryers, oily vats, and greedy munching haunt my reality. Sometimes, just sometimes, I'll catch someone casting a veiled look my way in another rundown diner at 3 a.m., always with that same insatiable hunger in their eyes. And I know they were looking for something I inadvertently promised them years ago. But now, it's a curse I can't escape. So next time you find an extra nugget in your box, enjoy it cautiously. After all, you never really know who's behind the fryer or what dark secret they've unwillingly passed to you. I'm about to share something that's been haunting me since childhood, a memory that loops with nightmarish clarity. It's been my secret for years, lurking beneath the surface of my everyday life. I was around 8 when it happened, living in a small, sleepy town where everyone knew each other, or at least thought they did. It was summer, and the tiresome days dragged on with the lethargic hum of cicadas, the smell of freshly cut grass, and the taste of lemonade mixed with chlorine from countless hours spent at the neighborhood pool. I remember feeling invincible during those long days filled with adventure, but that invincibility was shattered on a day like any other. I'd spent the afternoon exploring the overgrown paths of the woods behind our house, where tall trees conspired with the sky to create dappled patches of golden sunlight on the forest floor. I knew those woods like the back of my hand, or so I thought. That day, everything looked the same until I stumbled upon something unfamiliar, a narrow path I don't remember ever seeing before. My curiosity, naive and reckless, got the better of me, and I ventured further until the path opened to a small clearing dominated by an oddly shaped rock. Its surface was inexplicably smooth, protruding from the earth like an ancient relic. But it wasn't the rock that caught my attention. It was the sound, a soft, almost imperceptible melody, ethereal and enticing. I was drawn to it, my feet moving of their own accord. Beneath the rock was a small hole, just big enough for an arm. Illuminated by slivers of light, tiny objects glittered within. Like any curious child, I knelt and reached inside, my fingers brushing against something cold and metallic. I withdrew it, revealing an old brass key, its surface etched with elaborate, swirling designs. Holding it sent a shiver through me as if I'd disturbed something ancient. I pocketed the key, the melody rising to a crescendo before abruptly cutting off, leaving the woods eerily silent. The air felt dense, pressing against me as I hurried back home. That night, I lay awake, the key heavy beneath my pillow, echoing the unrelenting tick of our old grandfather clock. My sleep was restless, haunted by dreams where the key unlocked doors to dark corridors stretching into infinity. The next day, I was back in the woods, the compulsion irresistible. But as I approached the clearing, something felt off. The air was colder, charged with an unsettling stillness. The clearing was different, the rock gone, replaced by a large, gnarled tree whose roots curled like fingers grasping for something or someone. My heart pounded as I dug where the rock had been, my hands clawing at the earth until I felt it again. The unmistakable touch of brass. Another key. Identical to the first. Panic set in, my mind racing with the impossibility of it. I scrambled back, tripping over roots that seemed to coil and stretch eagerly towards me. Desperate, I ran home, slamming the door behind me. Clutching the second key tightly. I didn't sleep that night, plagued by the eerie sense of being watched, the shadows in my room playing tricks on my overactive imagination. My parents noticed my anxiety but dismissed it. After all, I was just a kid with an overactive imagination. But I knew something was wrong, something they couldn't see and I couldn't explain. Days passed in an anxious blur. I avoided the woods, terrified of what else I might find but somehow drawn there, the compulsion gnawing at my mind. Then, as suddenly as it began, the terror shifted. One evening, I found myself at the attic door, a forbidden place ripe with dusty memories and forgotten treasures. The key in my hand seemed to pulse with energy, urging me on. Without thinking, I unlocked the door, each creak of the rusty hinges setting my nerves on edge. The attic should have been dark, but it wasn't. Light flooded from an unknown source, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. My eyes adjusted to the glow, and there, amidst the cobwebs and decay, stood a door, small, inconspicuous, not there before. Trembling, I approached it, the key fitting perfectly into the lock. I hesitated, a deep voice within warning me to stop, to turn back, but curiosity once again drowned out reason. The door creaked open, revealing not the usual sight of rafters and forgotten trunks, but an impossible landscape, a verdant meadow under a twilight sky, the air sweet with unfamiliar scents, the melody from the woods clearer than ever. It was beautiful and utterly wrong. I stood frozen, the surreal beauty battling with the instinctual fear brewing in my belly. Then, the reality of my predicament snapped into focus. For just a second, I caught a glimpse of figures moving within the meadow, shadowy silhouettes beckoning, not with malice, but with a relentless, seductive pull that made resistance seem futile. Frightened out of my mind, I slammed the door shut, the silver of tears on my cheeks a testament to the terror that surged through me. I backed away, the attic darkening once more, and fled downstairs to the comforting familiarity of home. In the normalcy of the following days, I managed to convince myself that I had imagined it all, fabulous lies wrapping tightly around my sanity. I hid both keys, burying them deep in the backyard under the grasping tendrils of the apple tree. As time flowed, the memories dulled yet never vanished, resurfacing at the edge of sleep. Grown now, I still return, tracing the well-worn memory paths, wondering if I should retrieve the keys, face what lies beyond the attic door. The melody lingers, resonating with an invisible promise of understanding and dread. Perhaps one day, I will find myself unable to resist, drawn back to the threshold, where reality and imagination entwine, through the door to a place both terrifying and alluring, where the truth of that summer waits. When I was growing up in Pyeongtaek, just a stone's throw away from the hum and buzz of the American military bases, I often heard stories of young women, like ghost tales told to children. They whispered of romances with soldiers, as though they were haunting figures who'd appear at night and vanish by dawn. My mother tried to instill fear in me with these stories, hoping they'd serve as cautionary tales to keep me away from the influence of those who occupied our lands and our lives in ways we barely understood. Yet, as a curious 27-year-old woman, these tales only added fuel to my wanderlust heart. I worked at a small cafe near the base, and the shop was a quiet haven where the sharp, scorched smell of espresso clung to the afternoon air, mixing with the ever-present hum of military chatter. That's where I met James. He was regular, always seeming to bring the chill of foreign lands with him, which hung onto his hushed southern accent like a persistent fog. There was a warmth to his eyes, a contradiction that was endearing, and before I realized it, I found myself gravitating towards him, pulled by a force that seemed both fated and forbidden. Our nights were filled with whispered secrets between sheets, and his stories of life as a soldier were often veiled with a sense of longing for normality, something I had taken for granted yet never fully understood. I became a collector of stories, words unspoken by daylight and only revealed under the protective cloak of night. At some point, somewhere between the shadows of our clandestine meetings, I started to see military men less as conquerors of land and more as prisoners of their own battles. James was shipped back to the States after his term ended, leaving an emptiness that was quickly filled by others like him. Some part of me sought closure that never came, or perhaps a redemption of sorts in helping these soldiers unburden their hearts. It became a ritual, or a confession of sorts, as each man shared his tale, sometimes about the things they did, the missions they regretted, or the families they missed back home. It was a tapestry of agony and survival woven together to create an illusion of comfort, draped over the ache of steady discontent. There was Michael, who spoke of a recurring dream of running through fields of golden wheat only to stumble and wake up gasping at the crack of dawn, and Paul, whose theremin lullabies faded slowly into the static of lonely night watches. Each narrative was a thread that wrapped around my heart, slowly constricting it until breaths felt scarce. But it was with Ethan that the reality hit. The story seeped into mine like ink into water. Ethan, who was softer than the rest, had this disquieting aura about him. His enigmatic smiles were addictively mysterious but hid cracks underneath, like porcelain teetering on the brink of shattering. He often talked about shadows, not the ones cast by real things, but those of the mind, manifestations of unspeakable things he had seen. Once, he mentioned a mission gone awry, where echoes of gunfire morphed into haunting lullabies that lulled them into restless slumbers and left their minds in dissonance. One night, amidst the silken whispers of wind outside, Ethan confessed to seeing figures in his peripheral vision, apparitions of the fallen. These spectral beings followed him, not out of malice but in a silent testament to their shared history of fragmented souls. It was during one of these recitations, as he lay breathless beside me, that the true terror took root as he mentioned the woman in white. At first, it was just glimpses, fleeting flickers out of the corner of his eye, but as time passed, her presence solidified. She bore no hostility, only a silent sorrow that encased her visage, and with each encounter, her form grew more corporeal until she was as distinguishable in the room as Ethan himself. Her visits coincided with Ethan's diminishing vitality, his breaths became gasps, and the life seemed to drain from his eyes, replaced by a haunting hollowness. It was a balmy summer night when Ethan abruptly awoke, drenched in a sweat slick with fear, his eyes wide and unseeing. He said she had spoken for the first time, her voice a melody of echoes wrapped in the wisp of a chill. She uttered words in a language that was beyond his understanding but filled with a sense of finality, a goodbye not meant for him alone. He was visibly shaken, but before I could console him, he pressed a worn photograph into my hand. It was a picture of a young girl holding hands with a soldier by a cerulean sea, happiness radiant on their faces. "She found me," he whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of revelation. "My sister." From then on, the woman in white was all he saw. I watched helplessly as Ethan's vibrancy ebbed away with each passing night, pulling him further into a storm of fractured recollections and forgotten faces. He was disappearing before my very eyes, like a ghost whose presence waned with the rising sun. In a final act of desperation, I reached out to people from his past, only to uncover the chilling truth: his sister vanished years ago, lost to the tides of war, her fate sealed under the guise of collateral damage. Ethan's mind had fractured irreparably, haunted by the specter of unresolved guilt and regret in forming a new reality where sapphire oceans and childhood innocence clashed violently with the monochromatic shades of life as a soldier. One sweltering August day, Ethan left. A note by his pillow mentioned a journey he must take, to reconcile with his ghosts and lay them to rest beside the woman perpetually encased in pristine white. I found out later he joined those who embarked on dangerous missions, those hell-bent on redemption or seeking refuge in the endless expanse of conflict zones. Like the others before him, Ethan became another thread interwoven into the tapestry of memories that I'd taken it upon myself to preserve, a lingering confession echoing in the hollow chambers of my heart. I still work at that cafe. Each cup served a homage to tales told under the spectral gaze of moonlit nights, and with every new face that walks in, I find myself pondering not just the secrets they carry, but whether the woman in white still lingers in the shadows of those evenings long past, silently bearing witness to the lives left behind. When I entered nursing, I expected long hours, exhaustion, and occasionally ungrateful patients, but what nobody prepared me for was the night my past came clawing back, leaving bloody fingernail marks on the thin veneer of my normal life. A year ago, I was a nurse in the psychiatric unit of a hospital in a town that's more tombstones than people, a place where whispers of the past cling to the air like the persistent fog rolling off the hills at dusk. Our patients ranged from those haunted by shadows in their minds to those dangerously enthralled by the darkness. One such patient was Lester, a middle-aged man with sad eyes and a spine-chilling calmness. Lester was admitted after a series of bizarre incidents in his neighborhood, pets disappearing and strange symbols carved into garden gnomes. He'd often ramble about a glaring unseen and warn anyone who would listen about an impending cosmic reckoning. He was there for months, slipping through different levels of consciousness like a clock gone haywire, sometimes lucid enough for a chess game, other times scrawling frantic, encrypted messages with whatever writing instrument he could find. Then, one stormy night, Lester vanished, just like that, disappearing without so much as a sound or trace. We assumed he slipped out during a power outage, a theory that, albeit convenient, always felt like a thin veil over some hideous truth. For months, my sleep was plagued by dreams of Lester, standing at the foot of my bed, eyes wide and fixed on an unfathomable point behind me, mouthing words I couldn't quite decipher. Despite the hospital's reassurances that Lester was no longer a concern, a flickering candle of paranoia danced at the edges of my mind. Eventually, time did its sneaky trick of laying a fog over past horrors, and I moved to a new city, started at a different hospital, and even managed a sense of peace in the mundane motions of everyday life. That is until last Tuesday, when peace was pulled violently from beneath me. It started with letters. The first few I assumed were junk, plain envelopes with no return address, but the handwriting, jagged and frantic, demanded recognition. Each contained the same cryptic message: the games are not over. The sacrifice is you. Slowly, the overwhelming fear that Lester had found me gripped me in its cold embrace. My heart pounded as the letters increased in fervor and frequency, the content becoming an escalating series of threats and cryptic babbling about cosmic gates and my supposed role in safeguarding something priceless. Anxiety bled into every aspect of my life, shadowing me at work and wrapping its tendrils around each ounce of joy, squeezing it dry. When the letters abruptly stopped about 3 days ago, a foolish hope dared to bloom that it might finally be over. Last night shattered that hope. After an exhausting shift, I sunk into the couch, every muscle pleading for rest, when the sharp trill of my doorbell ripped through my drowsiness. The sight of the unassuming delivery man on my doorstep was my last rational moment. He handed me a package that contained a battered chess piece, the White King, and a note: "Your move." Panic twisted my gut as memories of chess games with Lester flickered back, his intense gaze, how he'd insist the games were more than just games, how he'd leave the king in his pocket like some guardian charm, how the game would only end when the king fell. Adrenaline surged, pushing me to grab a bag and instinctively shove some essentials into it, ready to flee whatever game had begun. But he was already there. Turning from the door, I felt a presence, a static in the air thick enough to taste, and there he stood, Lester, blotting out sameness like a silhouette against blinding light. His eyes held the same sad madness, but now they swirled with something deeper, a knowing beyond our world. "It's time," he uttered softly, the room warping around his voice. I tried to scream but the sound didn't come, choked off by terror twisting its noose around my throat. In a fluid motion, faster and more deliberate than his shuffling form suggested possible, he reached toward me while chanting a string of unfamiliar words. I staggered backward, my mind separating into shards of ice-cold fear, time slowing as if stretching to let the nightmare lengthen. He whispered about journeys through doors unseen by the naked eye, of roles fulfilled and games ending. I felt the tug at my consciousness, a seductive pull to something vast and incomprehensible, but my survival instinct kicked in, a primal roar drowning out his siren call. I grabbed the nearest object, a ceramic vase, and swung with every inch of self-preservation left in me. It shattered against the side of his head, more solid and real than I'd hoped, momentarily stunned. I dashed around him, hearing the shattered pieces crunching under his feet, yelling at my legs to carry me faster than they ever did in any track meet way back in high school. I collapsed into the driver's seat of my car, the engine roared to life, and I drove. I drove until the physical act of it burned into mindlessness, until the lines on the road blurred into a single stream, an escape from whatever cosmic joke I was part of. The radio crackled from the passenger seat, half-functioning, metallic whispers breaking through bursts of static, taunting my certainty of reality. It's been hours, maybe days, since I absconded from my life, staying in motel rooms with flickering neon signs, calling friends to check on my sanity, only to hang up before they answer, unable to admit to anyone the madness unraveling me. Each night, as I lay down with the stolen king piece under my pillow, I hear him, feel his gaze from afar, pleading with me to finish what he started. The things he told me claw at the edges of my sanity, the glaring unseen now something I sense lurking behind each sound and shadow. I'm not sure how much longer I can resist it, or if, maybe, giving in would bring peace to this waking nightmare. If my story ends in a way that makes news, no, it was never just him trying to kidnap me, it was me untethered from a world that lost its grip on reality. Having grown up reading myth-asshole threads religiously, I never thought I'd have a personal story that would fit the bizarre mix of family drama and ghostly horror they often entailed. Yet here I am, feeling the very texture of Reddit threads scrolling beneath my fingertips as I recount the unsettling week I had with my sister-in-law, Jenna, who seemed oblivious to the spectral nature of her claims on a house that was never truly hers in the eyes of the living or the dead. For context, our father-in-law, Gary, was an eccentric man known for his peculiar lifestyle choices, but if there was one thing he was clear about, it was that his small, cobblestone-laden property situated on the edge of a forgotten forest was to remain unclaimed until his departure being the word he specifically used instead of death. Gary's will explicitly stated that his house would be sold, and the proceeds donated to his favorite cryptozoology society, much to the chagrin of Jenna, who somehow convinced herself that she was entitled to the property as some form of inheritance, based on what she described as silent promises whispered to her by the house itself. I didn't think much of it at first. Jenna always had a flair for the dramatic, claiming to have spiritually connected with the souls of our ancestors each Halloween, complete with sage burning and interpretative dances in the family living room. However, it was the day after Gary's passing that things spiraled from inconvenient entitlement to supernatural dread. Jenna insisted on staying the night in the old house, determined to confront Gary's spirit and coax him into granting her claims, while we all thought she was simply grief-stricken and beyond rationality. My husband, Gary's only son, and I hesitantly agreed, more out of exhaustion than compliance, thinking she'd soon enough hit the walls of reality and relent. It wasn't until midnight, when the air felt thick with something unsaid, that the phone rang, the kind of ringing that cuts through the bone, vibrating with a sense of urgency uncommon for such an hour. Jenna's voice was barely a whisper, yet jagged and cut through with fear, urging us to come to the house immediately because they had decided to convene. Who was they, you might ask? Conveyed in hushed, half-sobbed tones, Jenna described the dark silhouettes forming out of nothingness in the shadowed recesses of each room within the house, shadows that stretched and morphed into people, old and newer ancestors of the family, she claimed, though there was something inherently wrong with their transient forms, as if they slithered under their skin rather than truly inhabited it. Panic-stricken but skeptical, we made our way through the murky, windswept roads leading to Gary's estate, guided not by belief but by sheer concern for Jenna's mental well-being, or so we thought. As we pulled up the driveway, the sight of the house sent a chill down our spines. The windows, riddled with frost in the middle of August, seemed to weep a silvery residue like tears frozen in time. The once homey structure now loomed as a spectral sentinel of secrets we weren't meant to uncover. Inside, Jenna sat cross-legged on the dusty wooden floor of the foyer, her eyes transfixed by the gathering of faint, contorted figures framing the dim candlelight she had strewn around the room in a desperate attempt at illumination. What do you do in such a bizarre situation? Laugh it off as one of Jenna's theatrical outbursts, or engage with the haunting at hand? Out of respect for the uncanny, we chose the latter. Jenna, let's go, I said, gripping the cold banister as I attempted to help her up, but she resisted, insisting that they had yet to deliver their judgment. And there it was, the murmur of disembodied voices, a chorus of guilty whispers reverberating from the very walls themselves, each distinct yet incomprehensible, merging into a cacophony of chaos that threatened to unravel my understanding of reality. Among the rabble, a singular voice emerged with clarity. Gary's. He rebuked Jenna's claims, his ethereal sentence dripping with a mixture of amusement and sorrow, eerily amused at Jenna's audacity to leverage a material gain against an ancestral vow of mystery. The house, he said, voice echoing through the wiring and wood, belongs only to the secrets it keeps and the stories it whispers into the void. In that moment, the shadows surged forward as one, a rushing tide of ancient grief and potent justice, and I realized the truth, that the house was claiming Jenna, mind and soul, merging tradition and treachery into a living lesson for those who dared to misunderstand, forever inscribing our family's follies into its foundation. A battle of heart ensued, our voices joining to pull Jenna back from the abyss Gary's house had become, to wrench her free from the grasp of ancestral debt she should never have dared to shoulder. With one desperate final pull, her eyes snapped open, cleared of the haunted haze, as she stumbled back to us, stunned, silent, and suddenly burdened with the realization of how narrowly she had skirted the edge of her own unraveling. The figures dissipated, leaving only the chilling echo of Gary's laughter in their wake, a reminder that some inheritances are better left unclaimed. Since that night, Jenna has never mentioned the house, save for its fleeting appearance in her dreams, dreamt whispers urging her not toward ownership but understanding. And it seems the house, satisfied with its revelation, has since returned to its dorm and vigil, a house that is no longer simply the dwelling of our father-in-law but a keeper of complexities and heartaches, quietly resting on the forest's edge, forever humming its ghostly lullaby. As for me, I'll spare my detailed encounters for future therapy sessions, lest they dig too deeply into the nightmare fabric of Reddit threads yet to be spawned from the depths of imagination or memory, whichever governs the truth. I've always been the person people look at and think has it all together. I guess that's why it feels so strange confessing this here, to faceless strangers, but maybe it's the only way I won't implode. So here it is, I'm incredibly miserable, and I have no one to talk to about it. This isn't how things were supposed to be. I worked my way through college, landed a stable job, and even married my college sweetheart. That was supposed to be the American dream, right? But dreams have a nasty habit of twisting and warping until you don't recognize them, and you're left in a nightmare. Every morning, I walk the halls of the corporate office wearing a mask of competence. I handle mergers and acquisition deals with a smile that could sell a lie as truth. The only ones who see through it are a few disgruntled coworkers, their whispers in the break room sounding like snakes hissing in my ears. "She's going places," they say, but it feels like the only place I'm going is further into my own misery. It must have started with the move to the suburbs. Derek, my husband, assured me it was what we needed, a new start, a bigger house, a dog even. The white picket fence was supposed to be our safeguard against the chaos of the city, but all it's really done is isolate me further. Each day, the suburbs grow quieter, more suffocating. Even Derek seems distant, our conversations reduced to exchanges about grocery lists and mortgage payments as if real connection is something we can no longer afford. And the dog, Rufus, bless him, he seems to notice my despondence, his sad eyes following me around the house as if he's the only one who understands. It's funny, isn't it? How the silence becomes so loud. At night, the creaks and groans of our supposedly perfect home whisper secrets I can't unravel. One night, as Derek lay snoring beside me, I started hearing a tapping sound, rhythmically constant, tapping from the walls, the floors, or maybe beneath the bed. It was impossible to pinpoint, maddening like a drip that never ends. Derek claimed he couldn't hear it, accused me of stress or fatigue, said I should see someone about it. Talk to someone, he insisted, pretending to care. But who could I talk to? No one wants to hear the perfect woman, the successful executive, admitting that maybe she's on the verge of falling apart. I told myself it was nothing, just the house settling, an old cliché to calm my newly fervent paranoia. But then it got worse. The tapping turned to scratching. Soft, insidious scraping noises that burrowed into my head like a bad melody. I attempted to drown it out with headphones, but the air took on an oppressive weight. I swear, some nights I could feel vibrations running through the floorboards like a heartbeat. The rational part of me, what rational part there is left, argued it was mice or some other nuisance, but something deeper inside suggested it was sinister, different. It was during the third week that I found the notes. Small paper, slips, no larger than a fortune cookie message, tucked in random places, under my pillow, slipped into my coat pocket, even once in the pantry between cereal boxes. "I see you," they said. It was such a simple message, yet it rattled me to my core. Derek laughed it off when I showed him, accused me of working too hard or even planting them as a cry for help, which made me feel more alone than ever. Was that all this was? A manifestation of my own desperation? But why would I do this to myself? Desperate for some explanation, any release, I started documenting everything. Each scratch, each note, each gut-clenching moment of dread. All neatly typed into a journal on my laptop, a private confession of my unraveling mind. Then one night, the sound led me down into the basement. The scratching was all-consuming there as if it were a beast beneath my skin. Hard hammering, I pried up a loose floorboard only for the sound to stop instantly, leaving an eerie silence that felt like taunting laughter. And that's when I saw it, a small, decrepit box of old off-white letters. Each envelope was marked with frail handwriting unmistakably similar to my own. My hands trembled as I leafed through, recognizing shadowy versions of my biggest insecurities and fears in slanted script. And below all the letters, a worn photograph of a woman who looked like me but different. Her eyes were lifeless, empty. On the back, in that same familiar handwriting, was inscribed, "I've never left." That's when everything clicked, the unwelcome realization slipping through the cracks of my sanity. This wasn't an obsession of a stranger or a sick prank. What I saw in the photograph was myself, a future self perhaps, or a past me newly unearthed. I couldn't breathe. The house, the perfect life, it wasn't a dream. It was a chronic deception tying me to something dark, something buried. Now I understand how misery thrives unseen, sewn into the foundation, subtly driving me to madness. Returning upstairs, I found the journal open, keys creaking under phantom hands, letters typing on their own. I slammed the laptop shut, the echo resonating through the emptiness of the house, the oppressive quiet of suburbia closing in. Derek returned from work, finding me in pieces, claimed he saw nothing on the journal because he couldn't untangle my inserted psyche from reality anymore. Yet his shadow stretched across the room, across the security of our lives, hinting, knowing. Maybe you won't believe my confession. It's easier to dismiss the distressed as delusional. But amongst these hollow walls, I became a silent witness to my own turbulence, reality layered with subtle terrors. And here, sharing with you, faceless souls who might only mock or dismiss me, it feels like a bitter relief. A small, absurd wish lingers that maybe one of you has seen this creature of despair too. Or perhaps we're all unwitting authors lost in our own creeping stories. When the shattering of glass echoed through our cramped living room, it wasn't just the vase that broke. It was the thin facade I had been holding onto for months. Sitting there in the dull glow of our flickering TV, surrounded by the remnants of failed dreams and a miscarriage that left me hollow, I stared at my mother, a beacon of possibility holding onto a secret of her own. There was a time I would have thought destiny had a cruel sense of humor, but this went beyond any cosmic jest. I was 28 when the ultrasound technician broke the news. The nursery remained unused, the walls still adorned with soft yellow birds ready to greet a life that never came. My mother, at 52, had shuffled into my room shortly after, her face an unreadable mask, clutching her stomach with a wild disbelief that mirrored my own. "You're going to have a sibling," she had said, as if the weight of her words was something we could both bear. And we, unwilling conspirators in this twisted play, carried on our lives. Beneath the smiles at family gatherings was the gnawing void of a child I never met, and the world wasn't aware of the story blooming in our midst, an impossible pregnancy that seemed more like a fairy tale spun by lunatics than reality. To cope, I nestled into routine, drowning under its predictability until the unexpected visit from Tom, my typically reticent brother. He stood in the doorway, fidgeting, eyes darting like a moth caught in undulating candlelight. "Sarah's pregnant," he blurted, the silence that followed tethered with the weight of 1,000 unspoken fears. Here was a tale we dared not even whisper, lest the fragile web of secrets binding us tear apart at the seams. Our parents were away at a doctor visit, leaving us alone to reckon with the strangest luck akin to staring down a cracked, antique mirror reflecting fractured destinies. Every long-forgotten resentment seemed to claw back into our minds, relentless and fervent, unrelated yet entirely connected. I often find myself gazing out the kitchen window at the dusk settling in like a bedraggled stranger making itself at home, pondering why fate chose our family for its sinister experiments. I follow the mundane, yet peculiar rhythms of our household, the scrape of forks against plates, the muffled arguments through thin walls, all while enduring the cacophony of blessings and curses from this supposed stroke of impossible luck. With each passing day, my mother grew rounder, her resilience like a pioneer venturing into the unknown wilderness. And as her due date crept closer, Tom's apprehension swelled, the shadow of his impending fatherhood looming, a specter feeding the desperation in his eyes. The night my mother went into labor, an unseasonable storm raged outside, tearing at our house with icy fingers as if eager to capture any warmth and joy before it could take root. I drove her to the hospital, shooting anxious glances towards the back seat where she panted and grimaced. Memories of my own time in the hospital washed over me, flecking the air with an inescapable déjà vu that settled around us like dust on rarely touched surfaces. I had rehearsed everything I would tell her at that moment, the doubt, the fear, the unyielding sorrow. But instead, the words dissolved, leaving only silence. Then, after hours that seemed like days, my brother's baby joined the world with the same abruptness as the squall outside. We stood at opposite ends of the maternity ward, each enveloped in our own minds' narratives, punctuated only by the cries of new life. Tom couldn't know the turmoil I experienced as I watched him cradling his tiny, wrinkled daughter, a bizarre echo of the joy stolen from me. In the adjacent room, my mother lay holding her newborn son, radiance and exhaustion etched in equal measure across her face. The two halves of my new world collided there under harsh, sterile fluorescent lights, beginnings unimagined, endings I still grieved. Standing at that strange crossroads, I understood the uncanny cycle spinning us all into an uncertain future, this shared, inexplicable dance my family and I stumbled through, where the miscarriage, the new brother, and my brother's child were confusing notes in a song none of us had intended to play. It dawned then like a blade slipping between ribs, that life was stretching around us in its timeless web, pulling strands taut and bringing us to our knees, making us acknowledge a mortality as inescapable as the setting sun outside the window. And so, we stood there, a family reborn through unexplainable means, a daughter who had lost but gained in the most surreal form, a son now a father shadowed by century-old wisdom, and a mother traversing earthly and unearthly boundaries as nonchalantly as a walk in the park. Could this be real? I ponder as the hospital smells fade into the background, overwhelmed by the overpowering scent of new life tempered with a twang of bitterness. Fate had given us wretched uncertainty packaged within miraculous opportunities. As I leave the hospital, squinting against the pre-dawn light, a strange resolution casts its light across my bewildered heart, realizing that our story was merely a new chapter in an endless, unpredictable, and reckless book of life itself. Last week, I stood under the gentle cascade of autumn leaves, amidst the flickering candlelight and the solemn faces of loved ones, when the gentle hum of my dream wedding spiraled into a living nightmare. My best friend, Dana, a renowned wedding planner with an eye for detail that could put Martha Stewart to shame, had promised me the fairy tale event, and up until that moment, she had delivered. But unbeknownst to her and lurking in the shadows was her new assistant, a pale young woman named Elise, whom Dana had vouched for but I barely knew. The day had begun splendidly: crisp air, the smell of jasmine lingering from the bouquets, and the soft notes of the cello resonating through the garden. Every petal was in its place, every strand of fairy light illumination was perfect, Dana's magic at work, as always. But it was during the vows, just as I peered lovingly into my partner's eyes, that I first noticed something off. Elise, creeping just at the edge of our peripheral vision, was adjusting something behind the altar, too fixated on a task I hadn't delegated, with an unsettling intensity. Out of nowhere, the air shifted. Guests shifted uncomfortably as a cold breeze swept the venue, despite the stillness of the mild October day. Then, an eerie change in the music, a subtle shift from harmonic to discordant, an unnervingly seamless blend into a melody that was as haunting as it was unplanned. Heads turned, whispers rose, but Elise seemed the only one unfazed, still fidgeting with something in her hands. The officiant hesitated, but continued as if nothing had happened, which was our cue to complete our vow just as strange shadows played across the aisle, twisting unnaturally in the flickering candle glow, all seeming to pivot around Elise's movements. My unease turned to dread, yet I pursued the thought that this could just be a series of unfortunate but benign coincidences. After all, Dana had never failed me before. But it was only the beginning. The reception, held in a tent on the long-stretching lawn of the estate, was where things turned truly bizarre. The structure Dana had so carefully curated had transformed. The elegant draping now appeared ragged, as if some unseen fury had clawed at them. The tables, set with immaculate precision moments ago, sat in disarray. I glanced at Dana, who was in a flurry of focused calm, reassuring guests, her placid exterior unwavering, while Elise moved with airy purpose behind her. Dessert service marked the moment of no return. Guests took bites of a cake that differed from the one Dana and I had selected, a confection that tasted of ash and left a bitter, earthy grit. Then the lights flickered, the sound system erupted in a mechanical screech, and the tent's entrance seemed to billow as if it were breathing. My heart raced as I stood paralyzed, the laughter of friends morphing into unsettling cackles that echoed in my ears long after they faded with the dying lights. It was then I saw Elise again. Standing too still, her eyes flicking across the room until they locked onto mine. In that gaze, I saw malice, pure, unmasked malice, and an unexpected familiarity as if I should have recognized her. It was more than a prank, more than a shift in atmosphere, this was personal. Retreating to gather my thoughts, I stumbled upon Elise's small leather journal tucked at the back of the tent, dropped in haste. Hesitant, I opened its pages, unearthing a series of sketches, the layout of my wedding, twisted and darkened with scribbles, symbols, and frantic notations of names, dates, and an unsettling history of unfortunate events traced back to Dana's past weddings, each an anomaly linked to increasingly bizarre and unexplainable happenings. I returned to the tent, breath short and ragged. Confronting Dana felt like betrayal, but withholding the truth felt like complicity. As the night wore on, I argued internally, watching guests leave, faces drawn and confused, unspoken tension heavy on the air. Finally, the moment could be postponed no longer. Dana stood radiant in the aftermath, assuring us all of the beauty of the night, her relief palpable. But I could not let the apparition between us linger without voicing what I knew. So, with measured hesitation, I approached her, the journal clutched like a talisman. Before I could start, Dana began, "I hope you're happy, truly." Her sincerity made the confrontation more cutting, my confession looming with a weight that had grown heavier with every ticking second. "Dana," I started, my voice trembling, "we need to talk about Elise." Her face darkened not with anger, but with a shadow of fear, one that mirrored my own experiences of the day. What happened next unfolded a history I had not expected. Dana revealed that Elise hadn't been vetted fully. She had appeared in Dana's life shortly after responding to an ad amidst a pile of unimpressive resumes, written off as just another assistant trying to break into the industry. There wasn't time for proper introspection, a decision Dana now regretted deeply as Elise's presence brought with it an air of foreboding not just to my wedding but others before mine, where mysterious omens began, stories of vows twisted in jest, cakes imbued with the forgotten flavors Elise seemed to harbor. In hushed tones, Dana explained she had noted similar disturbances but felt trapped by Elise's unsettling charm and exceptional skill at calming chaotic episodes, which always seemed to implicate her somehow, holding an unsettling power to weave sanity into despair. Elise was nowhere to be found. Her belongings had vanished, and with them any hopes of confronting her, leaving only the cryptic remnants of the journal as a testament of her interference. In that chilling aftermath, Dana and I shared more than an occupational bond, a new understanding of the darkness unexplained that Elise carried, enshrouded in a facade of diligent work. And as we parted that night, a whispered question loomed: would I truly be the asshole if I told Dana? Or was speaking up about the assistant not just telling a truth, but setting us free from whatever phantom shadows followed Elise's trail, determined to turn joy into discord and unity into isolation? The question, hanging heavy with implication, lingered uncomfortably between us as Dana nodded silently, a silent understanding passing, one that perhaps, if shared, might save others from Elise's yet uncertain malevolence. It all started with my niece Bella, a bright and imaginative 5-year-old who had an uncanny knack for envisioning things that often sent chills down my spine. I remember it clearly, the night Bella sat cross-legged on the living room floor as we embarked on a quiet evening of board games. Her parents, my sister and brother-in-law, were enjoying a rare night out, blissfully unaware of the eerie events that were about to unfold in their absence. As we pretended to race our pawns to the finish line, Bella paused, her eyes transfixed on something just beyond where I sat, her face pale against the dim glow of the lamp. "Auntie, they're watching us," she whispered, barely audible, her voice quivering with an unsettling certainty. I followed her gaze to the darkened corner of the room, expecting to see reflections or shadows cast as tricks of my imagination, but there was nothing, or perhaps something that only Bella could perceive. I laughed it off, attributing her comment to the vivid imaginings of a child, but an inward shiver made my skin prickle. As the clock ticked past 10, Bella grew increasingly restless, insisting that we close the curtains and turn off all the lights. "They don't like the lights," she explained with an unnerving clarity, as if this were a universal truth everyone should accept. Reluctantly, I complied, more to ease her worries than due to a belief in her unseen observers. However, the encroaching darkness only heightened my unease. With the room now engulfed in shadows, Bella sat silently, eyes wide, as if listening to a conversation from elsewhere, a place only she could reach. "They say it's almost time," she murmured finally, her words hanging thick in the air. A chill rolled down my spine as our seemingly empty home creaked inside, settling in a manner that felt almost sentient, a subtle protest to the unfamiliar presence Bella seemed so attuned to. Was it the house groaning under the weight of my growing fear, or was Bella's awareness of the they in the darkness squeezing a response from its very foundations? Now fully on edge, and unable to shake the sensation of being watched, I proposed that we read a bedtime story, hoping that the comforting act would lull Bella, and me, into abandoning these unsettling thoughts. As I flipped through the pages of her favorite fairy tale, Bella interrupted, her small hand slapping against the illustrations with surprising force. "Not this story," she exclaimed, her eyes filled with an intensity that made me reconsider my dismissal of her earlier claims. "They don't like this one. It makes them angry." The statement slammed into my chest like a punch, knocking the air from my lungs. An inexplicable static seemed to charge the room, buzzing and vibrating just beneath the surface of reality, a tremor only Bella and I could feel. I couldn't shake the building pressure of the silence that seemed to press in on us from all sides. Desperation clawed at me to reinstate some semblance of normality, yet my words faltered. "Who are they, sweetheart?" I asked, trying to sound calm, yearning for some logical explanation. Bella looked at me then, her eyes now reflective pools, far too ancient for her young face. "They are the ones who know," she whispered, and it was as if the air itself was holding its breath. With no further ceremony, she climbed off the couch, padding softly to the window where the curtains hung like sentries guarding a world just beyond, one that was foreign to me but familiar to her. Peeking through a tiny gap in the fabric, she smiled, a singular glimmer of mischief and conspiracy. "They're here," she announced, beckoning me to witness what she saw. I hesitated, the weight of Bella's statement pressing down on me, pushing the boundaries of reality as I knew it. My mind screamed to retreat, to protect us both, but something intangible, call it curiosity or folly, made me follow. Together we peered through the crack, and the world outside seemed unchanged, peacefully normal, unchanged night. Yet Bella's fingers tapped against the glass in a savant's Morse code, as if she were communicating in a language unspoken and unknown to me. I wanted reassurance, some definitive proof that all was well, but a voice, softer than a whisper yet louder than my thoughts, murmured warnings of ancient truths and veiled eyes hidden by shadows. The street remained ominously still, absent of activity save for the occasional flicker of a passing car's headlights. It wasn't until then that I realized what had been bothering me all night. The neighborhood was silent, utterly devoid of the typical cricket songs or distant hum of late-night televisions. Instead, It was as though the world itself was listening, awaiting whatever revelation Bella was prepared to unveil. I didn't have to wait long. Bella turned to me, eyes wide with a combination of innocence and wisdom that I could never fathom. "There's something beyond the here and now, a place and a knowing that only I can see," she said, each word a dagger that flayed the skepticism from my convictions. "When they come, it changes everything. They reveal the truths you've forgotten, the stories lost to time." Her words lingered in the air, a foreshadowing more tangible than the darkness surrounding us. It was at that moment I understood. Bella perceived the world through lenses I couldn't begin to comprehend, lenses that allowed her to connect unseen dots and resurrect stories buried deep within the echo of our existence. My phone buzzed suddenly, the jarring interruption a lifeline that pulled me back from whatever abyss Bella's words had opened beneath my feet. It was a message from my sister, confirming their imminent return. But as Bella's enigmatic smile broadened, I knew our lives were now woven with the eternal and the unknowable, a fabric threaded by whispers and shadows. Bella had shown me the edge of a vastness I couldn't retreat from, her simple acknowledgement of the mysteries cloaked in the mundane forever altering my perception. As her parents' car pulled into the driveway, casting elongated shadows across the lawn, Bella's fingers intertwined with mine, a silent promise of shared secrets as we watched the delicate dance of light and dark play out beyond the sanctuary of our small, understanding worlds. The night expanded around us, thick with unsolved enigmas, and I knew, deep in my bones, that Bella had indeed shared something known only to the watchers beyond the veil, a hidden knowledge that would haunt and captivate me forever.